I still remember the moment like it happened yesterday. My sister, Julia, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your kids aren't coming to Ava's party this year." That single sentence cracked something inside me, a mix of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak that left a scar I could still feel. I'm Rachel Donovan, and in that instant, everything I thought I knew about family shattered. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and simmering tomato sauce, the kind of ordinary comfort that should have felt safe. Ella was at the table, meticulously coloring inside the lines of her latest drawing, and Noah was stacking his toy blocks with an intensity only a 5-year-old could muster. For a brief moment, I let myself believe the evening would pass quietly, a little bubble of normalcy in our lives. Then the phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the warmth of the room. Julia Mercer's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated for just a beat before picking it up, trying to steady the tension coiling in my chest. She started with her usual upbeat chatter, laughing about some school mishap Ava had experienced, the kind of voice that could make any problem sound trivial. But then the conversation shifted subtly, the tone tightening, a pause that carried more weight than her words. She mentioned Ava's birthday, the big party coming up next week, and casually added that my kids wouldn't be included, that they weren't part of the guest list this year. The words hit me like a sudden gust of cold air through a sunlit room, a reminder of old, familiar hurts, the sting of being overlooked, dismissed, left behind, the echo of a childhood where my own voice often seemed to vanish in favor of someone else. I lowered the wooden spoon in my hand and simply listened, feeling the warmth of the kitchen lights press against me while a hollow ache settled in my chest. For the first time in years, I realized this wasn't just about a party. It was a reflection of how little my presence, and my children's, seemed to matter in the eyes of the family I had once trusted completely. The house was quiet that evening, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock providing the only soundtrack to my thoughts. I reached for the phone and dialed my mother, Margaret, needing someone to understand, to validate the ache that had settled in my chest. When she answered, her voice carried that familiar calm certainty that usually made me feel safe. But tonight, it landed like a weight. She listened as I tried to explain, as delicately as I could, how Julia had excluded Ella and Noah from Ava's birthday. Margaret's response was as swift as it was dismissive. "It's just a party, dear. Don't make everything about you." Those words, meant to soothe, instead echoed through me with the resonance of every childhood moment I had been passed over, overlooked, left in the shadow of her favoritism, a memory of birthdays spent at the edge of the celebration, while my sister soaked up the attention, flared up in my mind. My chest tightened, and the warmth of our small living room now felt brittle around me. I made the decision in that instant. The party would not be our problem. I would not let my children walk into an event that told them they were less than family. Instead, I would take them somewhere they could simply be themselves, somewhere the world would not judge their worth. I settled on the seaside aquarium, a quiet sanctuary where the lamplight glimmered on the water and on the little faces of my children, untouched by exclusion, pure and unaware of the betrayal that had reached into our home. Then came the slip, Margaret's inadvertent disclosure, as she spoke to Ella over the phone, her tone breezy and unaware of the rupture she caused. "I can't wait to see Ava at her party this weekend." Ella's small voice wavered, the color draining from her cheeks, tears forming in her eyes almost before I could catch them. I felt the hollow thud of my heart, the realization striking me that this wound was no longer mine alone. It had seeped into the lives of my children, and a protective instinct so fierce it burned through my calm took hold. Later, in the soft glow of the evening, with the children playing around me, I stumbled upon a revelation that shifted the weight of the night. Ethan Mercer, Julia's husband, was not just a distant figure of family privilege. He was the CEO of Mercer Vision, the very company for which I was managing a critical partnership project with Callahan Financial. A chill slid over me as the implications unfolded. The exclusion of my children, a personal slight, now intersected with power, influence, and opportunity. The quiet corner of my kitchen, once just a place of domesticity, became the threshold to a realm where my choices could quietly but decisively impact the ambitions of those who had dismissed us. Julia's Instagram flashed before my eyes. Images of Ava's party shimmering with perfect light and orchestrated smiles. A visual confirmation of what my children had been denied. The juxtaposition was stark. Image versus reality, privilege versus love, exclusion versus care. In that moment, I understood that the pain inflicted by my family had transformed into a weapon of clarity, a chance to safeguard my children and assert a form of justice that needed no words, only measured action. My grief had become purpose, and the currents of power and emotion had begun to converge, setting the stage for the conflicts and revelations yet to come. The quiet of our living room was pierced by the insistent ringing of the phone, and I could feel tension curl through the warm glow of the evening lights. Calls came one after another. Julia, Margaret, even Ava's voice through the line at one point, each one pressing, insisting, questioning why we weren't planning to attend Ava's birthday. Julia's tone carried its usual sharp edge, tinged with that casual superiority she wielded so effortlessly, and I could feel the weight of her words pressing against my chest. Stop being dramatic. It's just a birthday party. Her dismissal was like a splinter, driving straight into the core of my instincts. I kept my reply brief, steady, the words carefully measured but firm. To you. Maybe. To my kids. It's a message that they don't matter. The air thickened as Ella's small eyes lifted to mine, wide and glistening with hurt she didn't fully understand. Mom, why doesn't Aunt Julia want us there? The question landed harder than any argument could have. And Noah clung to her side, his little arms a tangible reminder that this wasn't just my pain anymore. A protective resolve settled over me, sharp and unyielding, and I realized this was the pivot point where silence could no longer serve as refuge. My children's dignity demanded action. The next day, in the sterile clarity of Callahan Financial's boardroom, the collision of family conflict and professional stakes became apparent. Ethan Mercer stepped in. Unaware that I held the reins of the partnership he assumed would flow smoothly, I could see the faint smirk in his posture, the casual underestimation in his tone as he remarked, "I didn't know you worked here. Guess we all move in small circles." I remained composed, letting the words settle without acknowledgement. But inside, a plan began to crystallize. The slights my children endured now intersected with the power structures I navigated daily. My hand absent-mindedly turned my wedding band, a quiet tether to the commitment I owed my children. Ella had been drawing again, sketching 3 figures, omitting her aunt in the picture, a small, layeau, innocent representation of exclusion that pressed heavily against the corner of my mind. Julia's Instagram story glimmered on my phone, the vibrant images of Ava's perfect celebration stark against the quiet truth of what my children had missed. Image versus reality. I realized then that the authority I held over the contract with Mercer Vision could serve a larger purpose, to protect my children and assert a principle that their worth could not be overlooked, even in worlds of privilege and power. The emotional rhythm of the night moved from the suffocating pressure of familial expectation to the vivid pangs of my children's heartbreak, and finally, to a clear, resolute awareness. By the end of that evening, I understood the full weight of what lay before me, a choice between passive endurance and active, measured justice. The path forward demanded courage, deliberate action, and a willingness to face the consequences of wielding influence, and I was no longer willing to hesitate. The boardroom at Callahan Financial was vast, its cold white light reflecting off polished surfaces and emphasizing the clarity of every decision made within these walls. I stood at the head of the table, overseeing the launch presentation for the partnership between Callahan Financial and Mercer Vision, my hands lightly resting on the edge as I absorbed the room's quiet anticipation. Daniel Callahan, the chairman, leaned forward, his gaze sharp but composed, and asked me to assess Mercer Vision's reliability. I met his eyes steadily and replied without hesitation. Their ethics don't align with ours. Professionally and personally. The room shifted subtly, the weight of my words settling into the space, unseen by Ethan and Julia, who had assumed smooth proceedings. Daniel made a note, nodding once with that rare mix of approval and measured contemplation. By the time the meeting adjourned, the decision was clear. The $6 million contract with Mercer Vision would be put on hold, and neither Ethan nor Julia had any inkling of my involvement in the matter. This was a quiet sort of justice, a power wielded without confrontation, a form of revenge that required only the integrity of my own resolve. Even as I sat back, my mind wandered briefly to the soft blue glow of the aquarium the previous weekend, to the pain etched on Ella's small face when she realized she had been excluded. The memory added gravity to my choice, reminding me why every action mattered. My children were oblivious to the dominoes I had set in motion, yet their small hands at play in the living room at home anchored every decision in its true purpose. I twisted my old wedding band around my finger, a silent talisman to maintain the focus and resolve that had guided me from the start. Julia's Instagram flashed across my laptop screen, the bright, perfect images of Ava's birthday party casting a stark contrast against the real world my children inhabited. Image versus reality, exclusion versus protection, and the quiet assertion of principle over privilege resonated sharply within me. Later that night, the rain came, heavy and insistent, tapping against the windows of the townhouse as Julia arrived, furious and unguarded. "You ruined us! Are you proud?" she demanded, her voice carrying the weight of entitlement and disbelief. My reply was deliberate, firm, a line drawn in the darkened room. "You did that when you told my kids they weren't worth seeing." The confession that followed broke the tension into shards. Julia's tears mingled with the rain dripping from her coat as she admitted she had fabricated the story that Ava didn't want the younger children at her party. Her jealousy had dictated the narrative, her desire for Ava to shine without comparison driving the exclusion. The weight of the truth landed in the room, exposing the root of pain that had been buried beneath social appearances for years. Margaret, watching silently from the doorway, finally spoke, her voice thick with realization. "I see it now. Rach, I forgot what family means." The rain outside mirrored the cleansing that had begun within, washing away layers of pride, false perfection, and overlooked consequences. Julia's posture, soaked and humbled, symbolized the collapse of her carefully curated image, while I remained under the soft yellow glow of the interior light, embodying steadfastness and the quiet power of justice well earned. The rain fell steadily, a relentless rhythm against the windows, turning the night into a silvered curtain that pressed close around the house. I stood in the living room, the soft yellow glow illuminating my face, a quiet anchor amid the storm outside. Every sound of water on the roof seemed to heighten the tension, and I felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing down on my shoulders. The door opened abruptly, and Julia stepped inside, soaked from head to toe. Her carefully curated composure, the perfection she always wore like armor, had dissolved into a trembling, vulnerable figure. "You ruined us. Are you proud?" Her voice cut through the room, raw and accusatory, each word landing like a hammer. I held my ground, the calm in my chest hardening into resolve. "You did that when you told my kids they weren't worth seeing." The words hung in the air, unyielding, a mirror to all the subtle slights and exclusions that had festered for years. Her shoulders sagged, and she let herself break. She admitted, "I made up the story that Ava didn't want the younger kids at her party because I was jealous. I wanted Ava to shine without being compared." The truth spilled out, raw and unadorned, exposing the real motivation behind the exclusion: envy, fear of comparison, the same kind of quiet cruelty that had haunted me as a child. From the corner, Margaret watched, silent at first, then spoke with a voice thickened by realization. "I see it now. Rach, I forgot what family means." The acknowledgement carried the weight of decades, a bridge being built too late but necessary. Outside, the rain continued, each drop washing away pretenses, a cleansing that mirrored the revelation inside. Julia, dripping and humbled, lowered her gaze in a gesture of contrition. The image of perfection she had cultivated now dismantled before me. I remained bathed in the soft yellow light, steady, resolute, the quiet power of justice and principle radiating without a single raised voice. The next day, the house was bathed in sunlight, the kind that softened every edge and made even silence feel forgiving. The air carried the scent of wet grass and spring flowers, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged the night before. I had set up a small picnic table in the backyard for Ella and Noah, their laughter filling the open space like music that healed. For the first time in a while, the day felt unburdened. I heard hesitant footsteps on the path leading to the garden, and turned to see Julia, holding Ava's hand. The woman who once carried herself with polished confidence now looked fragile, her posture uncertain. Ava clutched a small, folded card in her hand, and Julia's eyes met mine, with a mixture of guilt and hope. She didn't speak at first, she simply nudged Ava forward. The little girl stepped closer, her voice soft but clear. "I'm sorry I didn't invite you. Can we be cousins again?" Ella blinked, surprised, then smiled with the boundless grace only children seem to possess. Noah giggled, wrapping his arms around both girls. For a moment, all the tension, pride, and resentment that had lived between us melted away under the sun. It was pure, wordless forgiveness. Margaret stood nearby, her hands clasped, eyes glistening as she watched her grandkids play. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I see now. Rach. I taught silence instead of voice. I'm sorry." The words reached me like a soft wind. Late but genuine. There was no triumph in me, only a quiet understanding that healing often begins with acknowledgement. I accepted their apologies with calm resolve, grateful yet mindful. Some boundaries needed to remain. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. Respect and truth had to stand, unshaken. Or we would only repeat the same harm dressed in different moments. On the picnic table, Ava placed the little card she'd been holding. Inside, written in uneven letters, were a few simple words of remorse and hope. It wasn't perfect, some letters backward, some lines crooked, but it was honest. The card fluttered slightly in the afternoon breeze, catching the sunlight. It felt like a small beginning, fragile but real, a reminder that redemption rarely erases history. It simply chooses to build on it, one sincere gesture at a time. The cafe by the Willamette River was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty but earned, like the air itself was resting after holding too many storms. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, turning the river outside into a ribbon of gold. The smell of coffee and baked pastries lingered in the warmth, familiar and grounding. I sat at a small corner table, my journal open, the ink on the page glistening faintly. Ella and Noah played on the patio just beyond the glass, their laughter soft and unburdened, rising and falling like waves against the gentle hum of the city. I wrote slowly, my pen moving without hesitation now, each word steady, deliberate. Children remember who stood up for them, even when they don't have words to thank you. Love is measured by action, not appearances. The words were simple, but I felt their truth settle deep inside me. It had taken so long to understand that doing what was right often meant standing alone, misunderstood, even judged. But in the quiet glow of that afternoon, I realized that love, the real kind, wasn't about harmony or image. It was about showing up, even when no one else would. The door chimed softly, and I looked up to see Daniel Callahan entering, his presence calm and unassuming. He caught my eye, recognition flickering across his face as he approached the counter. When he turned to leave, he offered me a faint, knowing nod. "Some lessons are worth millions," he said before stepping back into the light outside. His words lingered in the air, not as praise, but as affirmation. A quiet acknowledgement that integrity had its own currency, invisible yet invaluable. I looked back toward the river, the sunlight now breaking into small ripples of reflection across the water. It reminded me of how far things had come, of what had been broken, and what had begun to heal. Through the glass, I watched Ella tuck a daisy behind Noah's ear before he chased her, both of them laughing so freely it almost startled me. That sound, their laughter, was what peace truly sounded like. Closing the journal, I rested my hand on its cover, feeling the faint warmth of the sun seeping through the window onto my skin. I no longer felt the pull of anger, the ache of exclusion, or the need to prove anything. The need for vindication had melted away, replaced by something quieter, stronger, acceptance. The light shifted, soft and honey-colored, brushing across the floor like a benediction. Outside, the Willamette kept moving, steady and timeless, carrying reflections of the sky toward the horizon. I took a slow breath, let it fill me completely, and smiled to myself. Some stories don't end with triumph or applause. Some end exactly like this, in stillness, in warmth, in the simple knowing that the quiet kind of justice always lasts the longest.